In 2025, more than 60% of SEO teams reported integrating automation tools into their workflows, citing improvements in efficiency, faster insights, and increased scalability. But where do we start, and how should we be looking at evolving our overall processes? This is the Voice of Search podcast. My name is Tyson Stockton, and today I'm joined by Tom Mansell, VP of Organic Performance at Croud. Tom will be diving into how SEO's team can automate effectively using experimental strategies that drive measurable growth. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
No, I feel like the world of SEO has been kind of in a little bit of almost like a frantic state, I would say. You talk to some and it's more exciting. You talk to others and it's fear, doom, and gloom. I guess how are you feeling? Where's kind of your perspective on these shifts in the environment that we're facing?
I'm feeling excited by it. I think all of these changes that have come over the last 2 years, it's arguably been more disruptive than the last kind of 25 years of search. And I think that gives us an exciting challenge, right? To change what we've been doing, move into new areas, which I think is going to broaden our scope as SEOs. I think we're going to be talking to more departments within an organization. We're going to have more influence, certainly. And I think that does pose some challenges, right? Naturally around things like measurement, where the value trade of search engines coming to your website, crawling your content, and then sending you traffic in exchange for that. That's definitely going to change. But it's about how we overcome those challenges. And me personally, I feel very excited and energized by that.
Which I share that total sentiment of it, where it's yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, and yes, we have to change and evolve, but that's always been a pillar of our industry and what really one of the things that attracted me to search was the fast pace and the change and the challenge of the new. And so it's yeah, this is a more amplified version, but we have this great opportunity of having the eyes and ears of upper management. It's I've had more conversations with people outside of SEO about SEO in the last 12 months than probably ever in my career, which is okay, now the spotlight's on. But at the same time, it's for so long we've been complaining as almost being forgotten in the corner and stuff. And so it's now is kind of that time to lean into it and step up into that kind of more focal point in the company.
Yeah, 100%. And therein lies massive opportunity, right, to drive change and real tangible commercial results for a business. So I absolutely agree with that, Tyson. I think SEO has always been in a bit of a silo in the corner. But I think to my earlier point now around, the future of search, the different teams and specialisms that are going to impact the value that we can deliver for a business, I think it's a really exciting time to be working with those stakeholders and broadening our skill sets as well, right? Which is super exciting. So everyone should feel energized by that challenge.
Exactly. Now, with this, the way I feel think about this is kind of in terms of landscape and tactics. And maybe before we get into the tactics, how are you looking at the space that we're competing in as it's evolving with AIO and these alternative search experiences?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think traditionally we as SEOs have been very focused on Google search, right? And the reason for that is that Google's held a very tight grip over the search market over the last 20, 25 years. We are seeing evidence that is beginning to change. We've got social search, we've got communities, we've got AI powered search experiences, and we're starting to see that landscape becoming more diverse as people move outside of the Google ecosystem in order to discover content and find answers. So I think certainly from what we're doing at Croud is trying to react to that with new propositions. One of them is a proposition called Search Anywhere, which is aimed at targeting the searcher irrespective of the platform. So it's a platform agnostic approach to search, and I think that's the direction we as an industry need to be heading in now. Taking the Google blinkers off, so to speak, and focusing on truly understanding what platforms our audiences interact and search on, and making sure that we're visible across those areas.
Mhm. And to me, it's also changing my perspective in how I look at the work, because it's in a lot of ways, SEO is no longer just what happens within your domain. And sure, we had like backlinking and stuff, but I think from a strategy perspective, now we're thinking more in terms of like other placements, whether it's through, I don't know, Reddit or, other affiliate blogs and things. I think there's this increased value or almost like application where now we're applying some SEO strategies or ideas towards external efforts, whether it's partnerships or other kind of access that you can get to domains beyond just yours.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, what I've kind of been what I've been peddling over the last 12 months with all of this change is that I think brand mentions are definitely the new visibility currency, certainly within AI powered search experiences. And as a result of that, we've seen a real resurgence in digital PR. And I think that's going to be a super important strategic element to have over the next 5-10 years. So absolutely right. I mean, the large language models themselves aren't just coming to your website or your owned assets to build their understanding about your brand. They're looking at all of those offsite sources, third-party sources, what your customers are saying. All of that information is getting used to train these models. And we as search marketers need to think about, first understanding all of that information and that perception. And secondly, how do we start influencing those in a natural way in order to improve our visibility? So 100% agree, need to focus off the site as well as on the site. And tactics like digital PR are going to be a hugely important thing for us over the next 5 to 10 years to do that.
Yeah, it's like a resurgence on some of these, I mean, almost in some ways like traditional factors. Like I feel like I used to look at PR as more of this traditional kind of like marketing mix element. And I 100% agree that it's back kind of like full swing, and it's more prevalent now than I think I've seen it in at least the last maybe 5, 10 years.
Yeah, definitely 100%.
Now, kind of transitioning the conversation a bit. So, we're operating and competing in new and emerging spaces. So, our perspectives of task and bringing in things like digital PR and maybe like our prioritization shifts a little bit through this. But when we're thinking more of like how we are doing the work, what are some of like the automation foundations that you would be kind of, wanting people to be really like thinking about, and what perspective should they have when we're thinking about how can I use some of these emerging technologies to either make my workflows more efficient and easier, or even increasing like the quality of the output that we're able to achieve?
Yeah, definitely. And I think if we just take a slight step back and define what SEO automation means to me, I think put simply, it's things that the machine can do that help us save time, they help us scale, they help us improve our output ultimately. And I think breaking that down into practical examples, definitely starting with research, identifying trending topics, keyword research, topic clustering, ingesting information that you can get from third party sources like Ahrefs, SEMrush, etc. And rather than that being a manual process where you're going through large quantities of data, you can start to put that into large language models to extract a narrative from it. So I think there's a huge research element to this, right, where large language models and agentic AI can start to do that heavy lifting for you. I think also from an auditing perspective, think about clear, repeatable guidelines that you can almost translate into prompts to assess your SEO maturity, SEO sophistication at a very tactical level. Again, that's one of the things that we're looking at Croud at the moment with regards to SEO automation is how do we, get the large language models to do a lot of those checks for us, which is super, super powerful when you think about scalability and standardization. And then finally, what I would say is strategy. So, understanding your current baseline, understanding what the large language models, know and perceive about your brand, and then extracting from there what areas you should focus on in order to improve performance. So picking out content recommendations, etc. Are all things that you can now do with these large language models and agentic AI. So three things: research, auditing, strategy. Those are things that we have been very lent into over the last 18 months at Croud.
And I love that you led off too with like the analysis piece. Because so often, especially in like the early days, as like, Chat GPT was coming out, content generation just dominated the conversations. And like in your three, I mean, I guess you can kind of pull in elements within those categories, but I wouldn't say like in any one of those three, content generation doesn't seem to be the main focus. Like, tell us maybe a little bit about why your core focus of leveraging these technologies is kind of outside of that traditional mindset.
Yeah, I think where you can start to fall into a bit of a trap is where you're trying to use it to speed up elements of your output and potentially sacrificing the quality. I mean, there's tons of research out there, that suggests how these different large language models are preferring to lean into human generated content. We've seen the rise of Reddit over the last 18-24 months, and I do think that there is still a very important part for the human element to play within terms of content generation. So you can definitely use it to a point from kind of like research, building briefs, understanding how you need to structure that content, but I wouldn't let it do the whole end-to-end process, right? And my advice would be use it to a point, but with regards to the specific output and generation, that's where the human element is still super, super valuable.
Yeah, it's like you're looking at your overall process and then kind of injecting at key points or kind of like leveraging for the heavy lifting at certain elements to then kind of make the human element more manageable at least.
Yeah, exactly. Know where AI can help you become more efficient. It can improve your output. It can help you scale and plug it in those areas, which typically for us centers around the research, the auditing, strategic kind of direction elements of building that process and that plan.
Yeah. Now, with this, I want to get into kind of like how do we integrate kind of like into these systems and challenges that come from that. But we have then kind of like those three buckets that you mentioned. And so we're looking at areas of kind of the analysis, reporting side, auditing, and into like the strategy. What would some recommendations be for then this some of like your favorite systems to use in actually bringing, you know, because anyone can just jump into chat gpt and put in a prompt, hey, I found something, or insert a data set and find, great, now we have these findings from it. But from like an automation standpoint, now we're either looking towards Python scripts, or I know Zapier has been getting more and more popular, or N8N's been on the rise. Like, what are kind of some of the areas that you would point some of the listeners to if they've used LLMs, but they haven't actually gotten to that automation point?
Yeah, I think definitely using the large language models, knowing how to prompt them in the right way is crucial to getting a really good output. We're building different tools at Croud that automatically hook up into these large language models via API, cycling through different prompt patterns to extract, the understanding and the perception of brands, which is giving us strategic guidance. But if I kind of strip that right back, we're also having lots of success. We've spoken about content. There are lots of great things that you can do with AI, just in the web app, the interfaces, to help accelerate your content program. Examples of that, planning content in niche industries where you're working with clients in very specific areas where you haven't necessarily got the subject matter expertise. But you can use AI, you can use these large language models to help give you that steer in that direction. It's great at understanding where you've got content gaps, where you're coming up with ideas. You can set it off across your website to try and scrape that content, identify content that's semantically relevant, and where it would potentially improve content, or where you need net new content to address that particular gap. It's also great at identifying trending topics, from industry press, and clustering those themes to give you tangible output. So I think those are some examples. If you haven't necessarily got engineering previous experience, you can definitely get very good outputs from those prompts to help scale your output.
And with these systems, and I feel like an area that leads them to, but maybe not enough people are like fully kind of embracing, is in a lot of ways it's making elements of our job easier. So then where do we then kind of focus that newfound availability potentially? And one thing that we were kind of talking about before this is like the approach, or kind of like how SEOs are leaning into experimentation of it. And so how do you see kind of like the intersection point of these emerging technologies, and more of like, I don't know, let's call it like the the mindset in the organization to lean into experimentation, rather than just kind of, we're doing page titles this one way and that's how we're doing it, and now we're going to move on to internal linking, like that kind of checklist approach versus the let's test, like let's see how things respond.
Yeah, I think to answer the first part of that question around newfound availability, I I firmly believe that I don't think we're necessarily going to get to a point where it can pick out the insight, it can translate that into something that you can communicate back to senior leadership within an organization. I still think with all of the information and all the data that it has, it still requires that human analysis in order to translate that into a compelling narrative that you can go back to senior leadership with, and translate that clear, actionable plan on what it is that you need to do specifically for that use case. So I think it can definitely do some of the heavy lifting, right, in terms of the research, the insights, the analysis. But there's always going to be that human element to it that needs to happen to translate that back into clear, measurable outcomes and actions. In terms of kind of like balancing innovation and results. I mean, personally, my belief is that we as SEO professionals and SEO leaders have to stay connected to the output of our teams, and really maintain our craft skills. I think if you know the output, you understand the output, you know how to deliver the output, you can automate the output, and that's when you can start to really leverage it in your day to day. I've said not everything can be automated, but it's about being able to take a step back from the day to day and being in those weeds and understand where something can be potentially automated. I think we spoke about it right at the start, that end to end process, understanding where these technologies can help you scale and standardize that output. I think there's also when you are doing this, there's a risk level to it with SEO automation. Low risk is the reporting, the insights, the research, using it as your assistant to help you find answers in that data that can help guide your strategy. I think where you start to get into the high risk elements is the tactical automation, the content creation, as we've mentioned, the optimization. If you are going to try those things, right, you need to first make sure you've managed expectations with leadership, be transparent about what you're testing, and map out the different outcomes and scenarios, right? High risk, there comes potential high impact on performance, both positively or negatively. So understand what the business appetite, senior leadership's appetite for risk is. Be transparent about what you're testing, fail fast, and have contingencies in place to react.
I love that you call out kind of these uh, the risk as well, because balancing that like immediate results and innovation is such a critical piece of this. And it's like we do have constraints and like managing expectations with leadership, like you mentioned. Like those are key pieces that will either let you keep doing these experiments or have that potential to like really like limit kind of the potential of it. Um, it's also, I think, a good call out that you're differentiating essentially like the analysis portion and the like portion that's hitting, that actually I guess a search engine would see, or the external facing component, where it's like, yeah, search engine will see your page titles, your content. And so with that, you have that question mark of, is this going to benefit or kind of harm the performance? Um, but it's a great advice of like, if you are uncertain or you need that additional piece, start in that area that may have less risk, that then you can work up to some of those more, I don't know, potentially either like there's a lot of value in those and you can reap the rewards of it, or, it's the area that you have to kind of recover and battle through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But always, be transparent and manage those expectations. I mean, there's nothing worse than you know launching something that's high risk. People around you aren't aware of this. There's a performance impact, and then you've got to justify that after the fact, rather than setting all of those parameters up at the start.
Absolutely. And there's a part of it too that I think you're playing into kind of like what is the business culture of the organization. And you have some businesses that I've worked with and I've seen, and it's like they really lean into testing, and it's like they embrace that, and they have, I think, a greater appetite, but then they also are, more reluctant in certain ways as well. So I think like the culture of the business, and sometimes also like if you are in a business that maybe doesn't have that established culture of the testing environment, it's something that you may need to kind of chip away with at time. And there's ways of like getting people more familiar with it rather than kind of just throwing them into the deep end and running some massive test that could have a huge swing of like, risk reward on the website.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having a clear measurement strategy around that, if you don't necessarily have those experimentation processes in place, and as you rightly call out, start to chip away at those, but list out all of the different experiments, all of the different tactics, have a clear measurement framework around them. I mean, one example that I can give here is, very simply, we were testing the impact of copy blocks on product lister pages, PLPs, and the way that we measured the impact of that was to isolate, control versus variant test groups. Right, we'd pick out some control pages that we leave as is, variant pages where we'd inject the copy blocks. And then,
Mm.
simply we just looked at the percentage share of revenue that came from organic search on those pages versus the control. And it jumped from around 19% to 21% share of revenue, which was a 10% lift in revenue overall. So, that's an example, right, of where you've got a test and then you think about the measurement framework behind it. And I think if you've got those things in place, it's an easier conversation to broach with the business that isn't necessarily as set up for experimentation as it should be.
That's great advice, which is, I think, at least in my experience, an area that I feel like maybe we talk a little bit less about is that component of, well, how do you actually get these projects picked up and establish buy-in on? And I feel like that's a great kind of tip or advice in there. Going into a little bit of kind of like, like an action plan or scenario type question. What would be kind of three tactical steps that you'd recommend SEOs take like right now this month to begin in like automating processes while still maintaining kind of that focus on control and measurable performance?
Yeah, I think it circles back to what we've been talking about, understanding the risk, right? And my advice would be start with the low risk areas, which is, the reporting, the insight, the research. And as you mentioned previously, if you can get those areas right, you can start to unlock some more of your time, which is, super, super valuable. And those areas are low risk from a performance perspective. So if you can demonstrate efficiency drivers in the low risk areas, then that sets you off on a good platform to, roll that out further, and unlock more experimentation budget within a business. I think where I talk about, research, insights, engineering, one example of this that we're looking at Croud is a tool called Brand AI. So the way that works is querying the large language models through a range of different prompt patterns. We're injecting the brand, the market, the category that they operate in, the different purchase considerations that a customer would go through. And we're extracting from the large language models, how do you understand the brand? How do you perceive the brand versus competitors in these different areas? And I think that's definitely something that people can start to do just through the web interfaces of the large language models, through different prompt ranges, understanding how your brand is rated, understanding the sentiment that you can very easily extract with all of the information that the large language models have collected from the open web, what that sentiment looks like, where you beat or fall behind your competition across those different categories and considerations. It's really good actually at coming up with content recommendations from there and turning that insight into action. And then, back to the point around PR, understanding and looking at the sources that are cited within the responses to know about, what are the most influential sites related to my brand and my industry. Which gives you some really, tangible outputs that you can then take forward into your strategy. So that would be an example of where I would start now with regards to automating processes. Is definitely around those kind of like reporting, insight, and research areas before you run off into trying to get executional output from these platforms, which is, as we say, higher risk.
And with that, you're hitting, I think, like right on one of the square like strengths or like focal points is of an LLM system, where it's like by nature they're able to go through large amounts of data And so you're able to kind of have those, pull out those pieces of information like the, identifying content recommendations. You can get super clever on your prompts to combine both existing performance, competitors, maybe even like upcoming marketing campaigns from the organization, and then identify pieces that align to it. I think to that point, I would encourage all the SEOs move beyond that like milkshake method or whatever it's referred to as, where you're just taking the unique keywords of your competitor and then saying, hey, there's our like strategy for it. Like we can do so much more cool stuff that allows us to be a lot more precise in where we're competing, which is then I think brings us back to where we started the conversation of like, it's not just the tactics, but it's also the landscape of where we are competing. And, you've said a few times that it's like we need to be more deliberate in that kind of where we are visible or what the sentiment is in those spaces to ensure that we're staying relevant with the systems.
Yeah, 100%. And if I could put a strap line on it, it would be you need more content in more places. So, the more of that you can extract from the large language models in terms of how you actually go about doing that is going to give you a massive opportunity to win in AI powered search experiences.
100%. Now, final kind of portion of the interview here is we're going to go into a lightning round. And so this is going to be our shorter form, kind of scenario based questions or theme based questions. And so I'm going to throw 5 different questions at you. It'll be just kind of like a different flow than the previous part. So first question is going to be buy or sell. Are you buying or selling that automated SEO reporting tools will replace human analysis within the next 3 years?
Does buying mean that I agree with it or disagree with it?
Buying is you're agreeing. You're all in. You're like, yeah, within
Okay,
3 years for sure.
I'm selling.
So
definitely, definitely selling. Uh, I think I touched on this earlier. I just don't see the tools being able to stitch together a compelling narrative without some sort of human analysis and context of, the wider business, industry, or macro climate that we're operating in. So, no, selling.
I actually would sell as well on this. Like it's a tough call because it depends on how you define like that process. I agree with you. I think it's definitely possible to do all the data collection, do the action analysis, sift out the information that needs to be addressed. But then what do you do with that? Like, how do you position it within the organization? How do you pick up on all these nuanced elements? Like, it would be so difficult to include everything in the training model to then allow it to do those things. Like, you would have to feed in little things on like personality quirks of like, oh, this person hates it when you phrase something in that way. So I think I'm right there with you that from end to end, no. From just the like heavy legwork, yes.
Agreed.
All right, next question is trend or trash. So this is going to be is something emerging and legitimate and going to be around for a while, or is it just a fad that's going to phase out? And the question is AI generated meta description production at scale a trend or trash?
Trash. I have never lost sleep over meta descriptions, and for the most part, Google rewrites them anyway. So definitely trash. Wouldn't focus on that.
And now with that, is it because it's a meta description or more of like that type of application? Like if same question, but we changed meta description to page title, same answer or something different?
Yeah, I would say more trash on the fact that it's meta descriptions. I think there is something in being able to use Gen AI to scale things like title tags. Back to our earlier conversation, there's a risk element to that, right? But you can definitely use it in those areas, just not on meta descriptions. I wouldn't put any time into those at all.
Well, sorry. Third question on this one question is Do you see meta descriptions actually phasing out in the next 3 years? Like, as far as Google doesn't even review them and they are going to generate something of their own regardless?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you think about where we're heading with zero click search anyway, and the USP of a meta description was that it would help improve your click through rate from search results. Well, actually, that click through rate's on the decline anyway. So, yeah, I do think meta descriptions are going to phase out.
I'm right there with you. I think it's we're going to see it in that same category as meta keywords. Next one is going to be crystal ball. So looking ahead, how do we see things unfolding? How will Google evolve its use of engagement metrics if more and more of the experience is happening within the actual SERP, like Google's AI mode?
Yeah, spoken briefly about brand AI and extracting from the large language models understanding and perception. I think we need some form of mention and citation rate to understand how our content is being referenced in these AI powered search experiences. So I think that's the first point. The second point is, and I'm less optimistic about this one, but understanding the context behind why the mention or citation has happened. I think generally there has to be some form of value trade in a scenario where the LLMs need and use our content, but don't always send traffic to the publisher. There has to be some sort of measurement trade off there, and that feels like a sensible trade. Understanding those mentions and those citations.
Yeah, I think this to me is like I mean, I'm personally not sure how this one's going to play out because looking at nav boost, like so much of that, which is a critical piece in really evaluating like the quality of the rankings, is now no longer relevant if they're not actually clicking through. And so I'm really curious to see if things like dwell time on the SERP page being a factor that Google would use of whether or not they brought in the right citations or they brought in the right kind of sources for whatever, AI output that was generated.
Yeah, I mean, I'd definitely love to see something along those lines. Whether we'll get that information, I'm pessimistic about. But yeah, I think that would be super super powerful if we could have that for sure.
Absolutely. Next question is going to be what's the word? And so we're looking for one word to describe the current state of where we compete in search.
Change. The game is changing. React or die. Um, the value trade clicks is dying. Reset the expectations, re-educate on how search drives commercial outcomes for your business. Think about how you can tie visibility to action. The attribution journey now is not as clear as it once was, but you have to paint the full picture: visibility, acquisition, outcome. More of this experience is going to happen off-site and across more platforms. So I think you need to, right back to where we started at the start of this, change and react to it. I think if you continue to hold, the traditional principles, it's going to be a very dangerous position to be in with regards to how you compete in search in the future.
100%. And to me, some of it swings back into a part of the conversation earlier where we were talking about this push and drive back into digital PR. Like, even though our metrics and our engagement, like the data that we're able to obtain is growing, it feels like we're also kind of swinging back into more traditional marketing when you didn't have all the granularity or all the visibility of each stage in the buyer's journey, where you're running a billboard or a TV ad and then hoping kind of people would come through from that. And so I think despite greater accessibility to data, there is this kind of gray area that's been emerging. Now, final question is a toss up. And with this, we want to know if you're working with a limited budget and you need to invest in one aspect of SEO to implement AI workflows, what would you prioritize and why?
Content, definitely content. I said, I think brands that can execute more content in more places are going to be the brands that win in AI powered search experiences and become that differentiator. So I would prioritize invest in budget that helps you deliver on that statement, and I would invest that budget at the start of the process, right around research, using it to help you build content briefs, using it to help identify what you can improve versus what you need to create net new, using it to help you structure not just individual content pieces but how that sits on the website. Think about hub and spoke models, topical clustering. I think all of those things are areas where you can use AI in order to help make you more efficient in that process. Don't use it to handle full creation. I think demonstrating human experience and expertise in your content output is definitely now more valuable than ever. But content would be the area, and the start of that content process is where I would lean in AI workflows.
And it sounds like a core fundamental in kind of your strategy or process is accepting this reality of we need to increase our velocity and output of content for our footprint on the web, regardless of on site or off. And so it feels like one of the core pieces that you're looking to solve for then is that velocity and output. And then where can you use this to kind of empower and enable that?
Yeah, 100%. And knowing where, making sure that you're not creating content for the sake of creating it, but it does have utility, it does have value. And then also making sure you understand all of the influential sources around your category, around your brand that are being used to, train the large language models and are appearing in these AI-powered search experiences to then hand off into kind of like, the PR and the partnership conversations.
Yeah. It's move faster, move quicker, but be deliberate and be strategic in that placement.
100%.
Well, with that, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Voice of Search podcast. Thanks again to Tom from Croud for joining us. If you'd like to contact Tom and find more about him, be sure to check out his LinkedIn profile in our show notes, or also check out his company's website at croud.com. Be sure to go over there and check out some of the things that mentioned in this episode, like the Search Anywhere product, as well as the brand AI. And if you haven't subscribed yet and would like a daily stream of SEO and content marketing in your podcasts, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your podcast app or on YouTube, and we'll be back in your feed in the next following day. Now, with that, that's all for today. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next episode.